So I throw it to the floor.
You mentioned that share of voice was in decline. Is that because of a diminishing budget at Tourism Ireland? And if so, by how much has the budget declined? And then in response, will the Minister reinstate the budgets that Tourism Ireland requires to attract those emerging markets we were talking about?
I can answer the first part of the question. In relation to a share of voice, what we do, particularly in Great Britain, is we measure our voice in the media vis-a-vis our competitors. So, for example, Visit England, Visit Wales, Visit Scotland will be key competitors in the British marketplace for us. We've seen them increase their investment in that domestic marketplace over the last number of years, particularly, obviously, we've got a currency gain, with the stability of sterling. We've seen our share of voice decline from over 40% to less than 10% over the last 7 or 8 years. So, as sure as night follows day, in terms of share of voice trends, visitor trends could follow. We did see that back in 2008 and 2009. So it's important that we continue to invest. We really appreciate the Minister made available an additional over €1 million this year to invest in the Wonders of the Wild Atlantic Way campaign, which pushed a lot of air access messages in rural Britain airports into the west of Ireland. So obviously we'll be very keen, budgets allowing to restore investment in those markets to get their share of voice back up to where it was.
Well, I think anecdotally we're hearing about price increases all over the place and hotel rooms are escalating again. I'm dealing with the fact that concerts aren't selling out again in Dublin because of the price of hotels. You can't afford to stay in Dublin, even in Ireland. Is that a concern?
Yeah, I mean, look, Split Travel Research, STR, is the data that we would use, which would benchmark the price and availability of hotels in Dublin versus a basket of other destinations around Europe. I mean, Dublin isn't competing with cities like London, Paris and Rome. It's competing with the second tier of cities like Barcelona, Copenhagen and Amsterdam. And over the last number of years, according to the STR data, we have seen the average daily rate and the average room rates in Dublin increase to a point where it's gone beyond its competitors, and that's going to cause complications in certain markets for us, particularly where currency has moved as well, because it exacerbates the issue, particularly from the British market. The one helpful thing for us is that because we've seen such a strong increase in air access, the price of getting here by and large is very, very competitive and very, very good, particularly if you're flexible on your travel times. So for example, back in 2011 there were 424,000 seats every single week. There are now 591,000, so there's a lot more competition in the air market, and we're seeing that reflected in the prices in relation to air, but certainly in relation to accommodation we've seen what in the long term will be unsustainable increases.
Yeah, and also we're hearing that VAT is going to go back up. The 9% VAT is gone. We're hearing that the government is going to go back up to 13.5. Maybe the Minister can answer that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think there's legitimate concern about the prices being charged by the larger hotels, and that's not just in Dublin. That's elsewhere as well. And there has to be a very serious question asked about whether they should continue to get a preferential rate of that. But there is no intention, if that rate were to go up, and it's very, very important that no damage is done at all to the tourism industry. So if we were to make a point of saying it served its purpose, it would have to be in the context of the large hotels, and only in the context of the large hotels who can well afford out of their profits now to pay an extra VAT. What's very important, I'll just finish this, what's very important here is that no damage is done to the tourist industry and to the smaller or the medium-sized operators who welcome them.
What kind of number of rooms are you talking about, Minister, at large hotels? Like, would you be talking about 50, I don't know.
I don't know at the moment, because I don't know how it worked out, but I know that there should be challenges and there should be questions being asked about those who are making very large profits.
In relation to that, would you look at like an urban rural scheme, like as in to encourage some rural hotels to sustainability there in terms of the increase in the VAT rate? Would there be, you're talking about big hotels, it would only be big hotels, would there be a difference between urban and rural hotels?
I don't know how you divide it, but there's certainly no wish, and we must see that rural element is protected. We must see that those who have a smaller turnover are protected. I'd be regarding it as a small number, but a small number of hotels who don't any longer need it. It's a very small number.
I mean, has that not been there for the new hotels that are going to be targeted? You stop investing and stop building hotels, and therefore create a bigger problem.
No, you're not going to be targeting anyone. You're just saying that a preferential rate shouldn't be available to those who don't need it.
How are you going to line that? I mean, what's going to be the criteria?
That's the challenge, is how you're actually going to do it without doing any damage to anyone else, and that's very important. That others should be protected.
Sorry, with all due respect, it doesn't sound like it's been thought out. There need to be a plan.
No, it's a question which is being looked at, being examined.
Niall.
That's correct.
Niall, can I ask you two questions, one for the Minister as well? Niall, you mentioned the common travel area in relation to Brexit, and you said we need to watch that. Have you major concerns about the common travel area known to the government? They've said very little about the common travel area in relation to Brexit. But and second of all, you mentioned Star Wars. Have we seen an influx of Jedis travelling down to Kerry since the movie hit the screens, anecdotally even? And just for the Minister, we obviously failed with the Rugby World Cup bid, and Niall mentioned the cricket match. Is there any major sporting events that you'd like to see come to Ireland, or maybe you're working on perhaps a hockey or football World Cup?
On the first question of the common travel area, we are heartened by the fact that both the UK and the Irish governments are adamant, and the European Commission as well, that the common travel area will remain post whatever arrangements are put in place in relation to Brexit. That's really important from a tourism perspective. From a Northern Ireland perspective, for example, over 70% of visitors from North America and mainland Europe come via the Republic of Ireland. There are just interdependencies on this island which are absolutely critical from a common travel area perspective, so that's important. In relation to Star Wars, we don't ask people in surveys whether they qualify as Jedi Knights, but there is a lot of anecdotal feedback, particularly in places like Malin Head and also in villages like Portmagee, where people have been arriving down and mentioning the Star Wars impact, so to speak. And there's no question that the commentary that we're getting in relation to our social media profiles and some of the videos you see, that was one video of many, by the way, that are out there, has been overwhelmingly positive. So I've no doubt that it's brought real good added value. But again, I emphasise, the real value there is in the collaboration between ourselves and the Irish Film Board and the various authorities working together to project a very positive image. And probably the only other destination that succeeded in doing that in a big way has been New Zealand.
Niall, just on...
Sorry, the Minister had one.
Sorry, the Minister.
Yeah, no. What we have done, our sporting events are now a matter of huge international interest, and our successes are being celebrated as we speak. In terms of very big events, we've no plans at the moment, but we've had the golf, we've had the horse show last week. They're huge international events, and we celebrate them. They're phenomenal. I think the more of those, the better, but they've got to be manageable.
Niall, just on the figures, you've given figures generally, but on regional figures, is there any regions that have done better or worse this year? Are there regions that have seen a decline in visitor numbers or in revenue? And for the Minister, the question of the prospect of a no-deal Brexit, are you making any preparations for additional infrastructure, for example, ports or airports for checks for people coming to and from the UK? Are you looking at that in terms of how the physical infrastructure will be able to deal with that, both from a tourism and transport point of view?
But the figures, we don't have official figures on the regional front yet. The anecdotal feedback that we're picking up, and it is reflected in employment data, is places like the west of Ireland, Wild Atlantic Way has done very well over the last number of years. Certainly Ireland's ancient east getting good traction too. Our biggest concern will be in border areas that are being affected by the currency changes. But again, don't have any official figures to say that, but they're the sector of the industry that we're listening to most at the moment, and they're probably the sector of the biggest concern in relation to what happens in 2019 and beyond. But no official figures yet.
Yeah, if I could just answer that question very quickly. The answer to that question is that I don't want to say anything alarmist, because I think that would be irresponsible. We think a no-deal Brexit is still very unlikely. But my officials, of course, are making provisions for every possibility.
Now, the number of visitors, a lot of visitors who come to Dublin like to take to bikes, but the budget for cycling infrastructure has been cut from 19 million to 7 million. I know you've been out in Ridshaw there in the last few months. I wonder if you've been out on the bike recently, and if so, if you've found like a lot of people that the infrastructure in the city is pretty shoddy and in some cases quite dangerous.
Yeah, you're quite right about quite a lot of that. It's there was a cut in cycling budgets in the last few years, but we've pledged to increase it by 200 to triple it actually in the next 3 years, because we recognise the importance of cycling and cycling lanes, and we recognise that there's been a deficiency there which we're determined to remedy.
Niall, in relation to the figures we see from Britain here, where is that in the kind of wider context of what you were expecting? Like, is it fairly online, given that we're, probably going to see some sort of drop because of Brexit? Has it been worse or better than you expected?
It's been slightly better than expected. We didn't expect to see any increase in Britain at all this year. We expected the number of British people travelling abroad in general to decline. What we're seeing in terms of British outbound holiday trends is that the British are still taking main holidays in places like Spain. Turkey is back in vogue in a very big way, for example, from outbound British perspective. And the markets that rely on short break business are the ones that are likely to suffer the most. So we've seen a better than expected performance, but I'm not sure that's yet a long-term turnaround. I mean, we're just taking it month by month and keeping the figures under real close review at the moment. And I think, by the end of the year, if we're a line ball compared to last year, it will be a good outturn, to be honest with you.
Minister, DEA were saying that they think they can get by on 2 terminals with 55 million passengers capacity. What's your feeling on the 3rd terminal still?
Well, there's a report being written on it. I don't want to say very much about it before that. That will be finalised and published, I hope, in the next month or 2. But that's looking at the merits of a 3rd terminal, as amongst many other things, the capacity report for the airport, and it will make recommendations or give the balancing arguments between a 3rd terminal, an independent 3rd terminal, or leaving it as it is. The DA has a view on it, certainly, and they've made a submission to that report. It's a very detailed report. It's about 200 pages, and that should be published, I think, probably before the end of September.
Minister, can I just ask you in relation to visitors here? Pope is coming out to see you in the next 2 weeks.
Sorry, which is coming out? Pope, sorry, yes, yeah, I thought you were talking about, yeah, fine. Somebody else.
Not the rugby one. So just in terms of the visit, are you happy that all preparations are in place in terms of transport, infrastructure and hotel places and the like?
Every inquiry which I've made would indicate to me that everything would be completely and utterly in order for Pope's visit, yes.
As we have the Minister here this morning, could we take some more questions on the overseas tourism?
Yeah.
Just to ask the Minister one question quickly on the cycling issues again. You did pledge earlier this year to introduce a minimum passing distance law. Could you tell us where we are with that at the moment?
Could you leave that till afterwards? I certainly will answer it afterwards. I don't want to be impolite, but it's somewhat distant from tourism. Okay.
Thank you, Minister. So, have we any further questions for the Minister on the reports this morning, or indeed any questions generally on tourism?
Minister,
Please.
would you accept that tourism, the success of tourism inadvertently but still demonstrably has contributed to the country's housing crisis through the number of properties that are being used for Airbnb that might have been used for as long-term rentals, and also that there's maybe hotels being built in the city now that would be better used for providing residential accommodation?
I think you're confusing 2 issues.
I don't
Because,
think so.
well, I do. Okay. I think you're confusing 2 issues. I think that
Well, we have the irony of where people are actually, homeless people are being housed in hotels.
Sure,
but please.
sure. I think the 2 issues got to be addressed by different departments in different ways. There's a huge ambition on behalf of the government, obviously, to house people, but there's also an ambition to promote tourism. I don't see them as being in competition.
Should Airbnb be regulated?
I think that's something we look at. We look at that.
I'd like to take one more question, if I could, please, because I'm conscious of the Minister's time, and I know some of you would like to speak to him after. So, could I have one more question with regard to tourism and what we've discussed this morning? Cyril.
In regard to say shortages of staff, or say like the chef crisis and that in the chef crisis in the industry, are there any plans to support the industry and make that?
Well, we're happy to engage in talks with them about that, certainly, because I recognise there's a difficulty.
Okay.
Just on that, ITIC has suggested that perhaps asylum seekers could be used to try and fill the shortage of chefs, for example.
Yeah.
Is that something you would support? Is it something you've looked at?
Something we look at. We would have to look at that.
I'd like to wrap it up now, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind. Thank you very much for all your questions and for your patience here this morning. Delighted to see you all. Thanks for your time. Thank you very much indeed, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you.